Hello and welcome. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear the music okay, or if you can hear me okay. Just want to make sure that's working. Okay, great. Okay, well, today we're doing a different thing. It's 4 o'clock in the morning for me, but I had somebody reach out and say that they would be interested in these if it worked in their time zone. So I'm glad to see a few people show up. Hopefully it's a better time for you guys than it is here in Kansas, United States. We're going to be talking about crafting compelling stories. So this is one thing I found a very important key to getting software out quickly and accurately is being very careful in the way that we make our stories in ways that drive good behavior when it comes to what the developers do. So first of all, we're going to be doing some polls and stuff as we go. If you go to pollev.com/mark434 or go to that QR code, I'd like to hear what best describes your role on your team. Let me see if I can get this to pop up for everybody in just directly where you're at. But you can go to that and keep it up because we'll be doing it as we go. There, I think that may be showing up for you in WebEx now. Oh, yeah, developer, engineer, quality system. Okay, so we got a little bit of variety. And I think this will probably be relevant for everyone because all the stuff we do depends on other people. And if we have a good way of representing what our work is expected to do, we'll be in a better position to work together effectively. So the user story can be a key part in just the way that we collaborate with each other. But I'm gonna jump to a cartoon here. Can you add the link to the poll here? Okay, I'll add it in just a second. While I do this, I'm going to show a cartoon that that I made that just kind of talks a little bit about user stories, and then we'll go through the rest of the presentation. So let's take a look at this.
Hi, I'm Mark. I help organizations write software more efficiently. A big part of this is helping teams find ways to organize their work in a way that follows agile values and principles. In this video, we're going to talk about creating user stories. User stories aren't agile in and of themselves, but they can be used to help us follow agile principles. For example, here are 3 agile principles that we should keep in mind for this video. Working software is the primary measure of progress. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. If working software is the primary measure of progress, we need to make sure we organize and track our work in a way that supports this goal. We need to make sure that our work is organized and chunked into units that represent value to the customer, and we need a way to sort out what is extremely valuable from what is less important. Most teams find that the best way to achieve these things is to visualize their work so it's easy to see what has been done, what is being done, and what is yet to be done. Visualizing the state of various pieces of work can be done in software or even on a wall with sticky notes, but in this video, we want to concentrate just on how to represent the units of work. A good approach is to represent the work through simple stories that describe what the user's world must look like in order to mark a story as complete. Here are some example stories using a typical story template. As a registered user, I want to change my password so I can keep my account secure. As a website visitor, I want to subscribe to the mailing list for a product so I can get product updates through email. As an admin user, I want to disable a user so I can prevent unauthorized logins by past employees. As a mobile app user, I want to save all my data to the cloud so I can access it from another device. There isn't anything magical about this particular format for stories. The examples we've just seen cover who, what, and why. Having a template is a good way to make sure you capture enough information to represent the idea of what the user needs without getting bogged down in all the implementation details. When our development efforts are driven by stories that represent our understanding of user needs, it supports our principles and fosters good development practices. Stories that are written in ways that violate our principles will hinder good development practices. Anything we can do to increase the quality of our stories will make the rest of our development process more efficient. One time, I was working with a team that was just starting to organize their work like this, and we were using a template similar to the one we've just seen. One of the users had missed the initial meeting where we explained what we were trying to do. He was a bit confused and asked why he kept seeing all these short pieces of poetry about software. Evidently, he thought we were writing some strange form of haiku. Good stories start off as fiction. The setting is the world in which the user interacts with the software. The story is written from the user's point of view and talks about things from the perspective of the user. The user perspective is very important because our principles say that we are going to define our progress based on giving the user the ability to do something valuable with the software that they were not able to do before. If we are working on stories that aren't creating business value for the customer, we are doing work that we've explicitly said isn't going to count as progress. So how do we handle all the work we need to do that the user can't see? How do we handle stories about the developer's world? How do we handle stories like this? As a developer, I want a database with all the tables to model the data so I can store information the application needs. This is a bad story because it violates our principles for software development. Notice I said the story is bad, not the idea of having a database to store data. We definitely need a database. But if we create this story, almost all of the application depends on it being done first. We could complete this story and have no functionality we can show our user, nothing they can actually use as working software. But this would violate our principles. Further, the information we need to acquire to complete this story will only be known when we've figured out how we are going to build the other parts of the system. So in effect, a story like this is both a prerequisite for and a dependency of every other story. When you have two things that both depend on the other being done first, you have a recipe for deadlock. If you've ever worked on a story like this, you may have experienced a long period of time where the user is asking how things are going, and the development team is saying, well, we have a bunch of setup work to do first before we can start working on the actual application. There is another way. If you write your stories from the user perspective, you can build just the parts you need in order to create some value for the user. This likely will mean building some of the database, but only the pieces you need as you need them to complete each story. It may seem counterintuitive for developers to build software from the user's perspective, because such an approach means you may have to rework some of the things you've done in the past as future stories become clear. However, software projects that fail usually do so because they weren't focused on delivering actual usable business value to the user on a regular basis. Building the application the way the user thinks about value minimizes this risk. If you are following the other Agile principles, the cost of some rework is trivial compared to the benefits it provides in delivering business value sooner rather than later.
Okay, well, that gives a little bit of an overview of some of the things we're going to be looking at in more detail here. So we talked about user stories, that they represent work. So question for you, what best describes your feelings about using user stories? Just want to see what people think. Does it seem like just a silly way to say requirements? Is it a very useful way to capture high-level details of real users? Is it too little information to actually be useful? Doesn't represent much of what the user actually wants? Or love and adoration, or loathing and hate? And there's not a right answer here. This is how you feel about user stories. And depending on your experience, you might choose any one of these particular things. Just a few seconds, see if we've got any other feelings related to user stories. Let me throw this link here again, just in case anybody didn't get it the first time. And we'll go ahead and move on here. So a user story starts out as fiction. It describes a state of the world that that doesn't exist yet. And this is important because the whole point of a user story is to say, here's what's going to happen. If we think of, here's some works of fiction, right? We got cartoons or comic books. So those are works of fiction. Now, these are pretty long. These are maybe, I don't know how long comic book is, depends, but the longer works of fiction. Here's shorter works of fiction. And so we've got shorter stories right here that describe some work of fiction. Dick Tracy, it's got 3 panels. And then I think probably the model that I like for thinking of user stories comes down to the far side, where we've got a very small single panel that represents an entire story in very, very few words. Very, very simple, but it's very, very short. In our user stories, we want to be answering the questions who, what, and why. Now notice, we didn't say who, what, why, and how, because if we're using the user stories to prioritize work, we don't need to get into the details of how it's going to be done. We just need to know what's the next most important thing to work on. And if we get into the how, then we end up doing a bunch of work up front when we create the stories before we even know if it's going to be worked on next. So the how is what we want to leave off. A very common way to do this is, like I mentioned, that template as a I want to, so I can. Now there's nothing magical about this template, but this helps make sure that we capture the words, capture the details that are important. You can kind of think of it like a mad gab, where you fill in the blanks. So this can be a very effective way. There's other ways to do it, but the big thing we want to do is make sure we know who this is for, what they expect to do, and why they want it. So here's an example. As a toddler, I want a way to trigger Baby Shark so I can play it on my own. Well, we know who this is for. It's for the toddler. We know what they want to do. They want to play Baby Shark, and why they want to do it. They don't have to want to wait for their parent to come and trigger Baby Shark for them. Now, an important aspect of user stories is that they should show how the world will actually be better for that particular user. So here's a kind of silly example. This is actually my great-grandpa in Washington State, I believe. But not the cow. The man there's my grandpa. So as a cow, I want to be milked so I will be comfortable. So now notice this user story represents things from one aspect, from the cow's point of view. But there could also be another story from another point of view. As a dairy farmer, I want cows milked on demand so I can maximize milk production. Those both represent possibly the same thing, but different aspects, different users, different motivations, different things that they are hoping to accomplish with this user story. So that's what the farmer wants. And then there is why he actually might want it. So how will we achieve this? Well, that's to be determined. We've just got the story so we can know what's the value we hope this story will provide. And then we can prioritize when we're going to work on it, and how we're actually going to achieve this can be determined later. So the farmer could staff the barn for 24/7. The farmer could add a buzzer to page him whenever a cow comes in the barn and wants to be milked. Or the farmer could, like one of my friends, put in several of these machines. This is an automated milking machine. A friend of mine here in our county has that. The cow comes in, it scans the cow to figure out which cow it is, it cleans the cow, it uses lasers to guide the milking machine, connects to the cow's udder. Cows like it because whenever the cows start to get uncomfortable, they just come in and the machine milks them. So all of these are ways to make this particular story, which started out as fiction, into a reality. Stories that support our principles foster good development, but bad stories hinder the development process. So like I mentioned, the story should be a work of fiction, should be from the user's point of view. And when we think of software, progress means the user can do something new that makes them happy. So that work of fiction becomes a reality. Waste means we've got stories that we're working on that has no return on investment for the user. So take a look at this story. It says, as a developer, I want a CI/CD pipeline so I can deploy to the cloud. Now, how does this story make you feel? Like if you have to click on one of these faces here, which one represents the way that this story makes you feel? If you see a story like this, what's your reaction to it just kind of emotionally? Okay, so we've got two people there in the middle. One person saying, all right, that they're pretty happy with it. I would suggest that this probably is not. Whoops, move on here. That this particular story may not be the best way to efficiently work stuff. So, what return on investment does the user actually get? So there's the story again. What return on investment does the user actually get out of this story? And in this case, there probably is not return on investment on the story. So I would actually say this is a bad story or a less optimal story. Now, that doesn't mean that it's bad to build a pipeline. It would be very good to build a pipeline. This is a good thing to accomplish, but this may not be the best story or the best way to represent it. So what might happen if we treat the pipeline as progress? If we were to think in terms of treating the pipeline as progress, now we're measuring something as progress and giving ourselves credit for something that isn't driven by the return on investment that it gives to the user. So as a developer, I want to build a CI/CD pipeline so I can deploy to the crowd. Well, this will require building, or as opposed to, I'm sorry. So there's this story. I would suggest that a better story might be to say, as a user, I want to see the logo so I know I'm at the right site. Now, notice this will require building some of the CI/CD pipeline if our rules are that we have to deploy everything through the CI/CD pipeline. But we'll build just enough in order to achieve this for the user. And the beauty of this approach is now we're building things incrementally, giving piece by piece something that the user can see as progress. And it's funny because this story here, well, again, let's just a second. So this will prove that the CI/CD pipeline is capable of deploying the application. I worked on a team that had stories for building the CI/CD pipeline. And I tried steering away from that, but they were really set on the way they wanted to do that. They ended up working for more than a year building out a very robust, very well engineered, very well architected CI/CD pipeline that when we got ready to try to do these first very, very simple stories, I think the one for the logo worked, but the next one that we got to, it turned out the pipeline, this beautiful pipeline, was wholly inadequate for deploying the software that they were actually going to build. And so it ended up happening is they had all this effort into building a CI/CD pipeline that built something that was not what they needed. With a story like this, if we start and drive the building of the pipeline and all the other things that we need based on giving the user something to do with the software that they see as progress, it constrains the work that we do on the CI/CD pipeline and proves it as we go that it does that it's actually capable of doing what the application is going to need. And that particular software project ended up failing. Now, why do software projects fail? Well, they fail when they fail to deliver working software. If we build from the user's perspective, we're able to increase our chances of delivering working software, and we're able to decrease our chances of failing. So how does the user think about software? Oh, whoops, I thought I took the slides out. Okay, we're going on. So fail to deliver working software, build from the user's perspective. How does the user think about software? Well, let's look at some examples here. This is kind of a little bit different example. Let's look at nothing. So let's say I want to. So I'm in Kansas, United States, and I live below Kansas City down here in Fort Scott. So right down here, and it's about an hour and a half to get to Kansas City, which is north of me. So if I have a story that says, as a driver of a car, actually, did I miss a slide here? I think I may have deleted some. Oh, we'll come back to it. So how does the user think about software? One point I want to point out is that users think about software in terms of what it lets them do. So let's look at an example of something that lets them do something. So as a driver of a car, I want trees cleared from Fort Scott to Kansas City so we can level it. So that could be a potential user story. But now notice, I've said who it's for, I've said what I want to accomplish, but when I get into why we're doing it, I now have not what I get from it as a user. So let's try to refine this story and say, as a driver of a car, I want a highway from Fort Scott to Pleasanton. Pleasanton is right up about here. It's a town maybe a fourth of the way to Kansas City. I want a highway so I can drive back and forth. Well, now I've got something that's driven a little bit more by what I want to actually accomplish, not by the steps I need to take to accomplish building a highway. So back in this story, I'm saying I want to want to be able to clear the trees so we can level it later. This story isn't written from the user perspective of what it actually does for me. This story is written in the mechanics of how I think I should achieve this. However, this story is actually written to give the user something they can do. They can drive back and forth. But maybe we can make this, can we split this story down? Can we make this actually something smaller? Well, we might try something like this. As a driver of a 4x4. Now, notice I've now become, instead for just a very specific user, I want a trail from Fort Scott to Pleasanton, which should be easier to put in than a highway, so I can travel only when it's in good weather. Now, notice this story is much, much more specific. We've got a more specific user. We've got something that's easier to create than the highway. And then we've also got that we only expect to be able to use this in good weather. So this could be equivalent to building out the happy path for one particular type of user. So now we're putting in a trail. It might look something like this. Now, it's not what the user ultimately wants, but we now have a way to show the user we've made progress and for them to exercise this thing that we've built. So then we might go and say, okay, as a driver of a car, I want a gravel road from Fort Scott to Pleasanton so I can drive back and forth. And this story builds on the one that says we put in a trail. We put in a trail and then we convert it to a gravel road. So I've got progress that the user can actually experience, but I'm building this thing incrementally. Then we might say, as a driver of a car, now I want a paved road from Fort Scott to Pleasanton so I can drive back and forth at high speeds. Or maybe I decide to take the trail on up to the next town, or do a trail to the next town and then put gravel on it. But the point here is that we're incrementally building a little bit more that the user can experience in the application. And then we might say, you might take the trail all the way to Kansas City so you can drive back and forth there in good weather. It might look something like this. And the point is that we can continue to build this on itself. But, and you might add, the objection is, and the objection that comes up in software is like, but we really want a highway. We don't want a trail. We don't want a gravel road. But what if we change our mind once we've been there? Like, what if we get to Kansas City, we build a trail the way to Kansas City and go there for the first time and like, hey, that's on second thought, let's not build a highway to Kansas City. Tis a silly place. There's not a reason we actually want to go there. How much money is invested in software that turns out not to do what is needed? And so this incremental approach allows us to prove that it's needed. And in some ways, sometimes we look at that and say, well, but we know what we need and it'll take longer to do it if we do it incrementally. My experience has been that if you do it incrementally and you actually build automation, automated testing, automatic deployment, stuff like that into your process, it may be true that on paper it takes longer, but the amount of things you discover that you end up not needing to do way more than makes up for the fact that that you're doing smaller increments instead of building out everything that the customer may think they want at the beginning. I've been in lots of situations where we've built something, been building something, and there's some piece that they said was vitally important, but when they get to the point like, we could go live with this, or we can build this other piece of thing that you want, all of a sudden that other thing becomes not as important, or they're like, oh, but there's this one piece of it we need that's really easy to do, let's go ahead and build that. And had we built it before, just all part of one big bang, we wouldn't have had that discussion. They wouldn't have been in the driver's seat, so to say, of being able to decide what happens next. So what if we build a highway to Kansas City and discover the city has been taken over by zombies? Well, maybe it's better not to have a highway that they can easily walk all the way back down to Fort Scott. The idea here is that we want the experience with what we're building in incremental pieces. So we often think about our application in layers of cake. So we've got the user interface, maybe that's the candles on the top part. Then we've got business logic, we've got the database, and we've got hardware, some form of something like this. And this piece right here, I want this slice, said no user ever. No user comes to you and says, I want you to build me, I need an application. So the first thing I want you to see from you is a database. That's not how users think about the application. Now, if you're a kid who only eats the frosting, you might want a slice like this. But in general, what we want to be thinking of is how to get slices all the way through the application. We want something that the user can actually experience in the way that the software is meant to be experienced. And if we try to build out like this, if we try to write stories that build out like this, we're going to be missing the opportunity to get rapid feedback on what we're providing for the user. Now, a common objection to this is that you can't build a house until you have a foundation, and that is completely true for building a house. But if we're working in software, we're not building a house. We're building software. And there's things that you can do in code that you absolutely cannot do in concrete. And the value of doing these slices is that we get that feedback from the users quickly and rapidly. So just visual of what we're talking about here with the road is starting with the simplest thing that we can actually start exercising, see how well it works, see if we even want to go to the destination, then take another iteration where we build it out of turning it into gravel so we can now get back and forth a little bit more rapidly. And then if that all looks good, and the next most important thing is to make the distance between those 2 points, make it take less time, then we can choose to, the user can tell us that the most important thing is to go ahead and make the highway. Or they may say, it turns out we were trying to go to Kansas City. Let's not go to Kansas City. That's a silly place. Let's go to St. Louis or something like that. But by starting with the trail, the cost if we end up abandoning something is much, much lower for us. Now, one thing with the idea of the cake and the house and different things like that is there's a lot of power in metaphors, and there's also a lot of danger in metaphors as well, because it's very tied to how we think. So metaphors take physical experiences and then use them to represent abstract ideas. And a metaphor that I think is very useful to think of when it comes to software is the idea of sketching software versus carving software. So if we think of sketching, where we're fine with building a little bit, getting feedback from the user, we're going to sketch a little bit, give it to the user, let them try it, see what they think, come back. I don't know if when you were kids, there was how to draw a horse, and you draw a circle here, lines there, and pretty soon you've possibly erased all the lines you started with or covered them up, but they gave you a way to head toward where you're going and give you feedback on whether that's what you actually wanted or not. The Sphinx, on the other hand, is something that was carved. There's not a lot of room to try something and then back off. You don't carve the Sphinx ear and then just say, now we're going to erase it and do something else. So in thinking of our user stories, we want to think about how we're going to evolve and grow and sketch them rather than how we're going to chisel the application with a hammer. Another metaphor that I think is very useful to think of is not how do we build a house, but how do we grow a city? So cities respond to change. So this idea of growing a city versus building a building, the growing part of it, I think very much represents the way we want to think about our applications. For example, in New York, there are subway lines that made perfect sense when they were built, were used when they were built, but the city has grown in different ways that they're no longer used anymore. That's not a bad thing. That was the city growing and responding to change. And if we have user stories that give some capability to the user in a simplified form so we can get feedback, or possibly so they can start using it in production, give us feedback so we can further refine it, that is not a bad way for our application to evolve. On the other hand, if we tell the user you're going to have to wait for a year until we give you anything, that probably is going to mean the application will be built in a way that doesn't have as rapid feedback from the user, which probably means we're going to get some things wrong and it's not going to be as efficient. So question for you, if a ship replaces one board every year for 800 years, so eventually every part of the ship has been replaced, is it still the same ship? If you've taken a philosophy class, you may have encountered this question as the question about the ship of Theseus. And so the ship of Theseus was the one that he sailed to defeat the Minotaur and sailed back in, forgot to change the color of the sails, and his father thought he had died, and so his father threw himself in the sea. Well, that was supposed to happen, if I remember the dates right, about 800 years before Socrates. When Socrates was condemned to death, the story is he wasn't able to be executed right away because whenever the ship of Theseus was out on its commemorative journey, it was no prisoners could be executed. So he had to wait for the ship of Theseus to come back. Well, that was like 800 years later, and the ship had been replaced board by board to the point that you now have this question of, is it the same ship or not? And this should be how we're thinking of software. Our software should be changed piece by piece as it evolves toward what it needs to better meet the user's need, even if that means at some point we've replaced every single line of code. Now, in most situations, that's not going to happen, but we should be very willing to replace lines of code if it lets us evolve toward what the user needs. So let's think of, in this case, imagine that we're replacing an existing system. We're writing a new piece of software that replaces an existing system. And we have these different categories for our user stories. We've got some, so the yellow, that is necessary just to be capable of demonstrating. So it's a feature that creates a rough means of producing the desired results. It's not necessarily good for it doesn't mean it can go to production, but it just means we can demonstrate what the software does in a way the user can kind of experience. We've also got orange stories that are things that are necessary in order if we want to deploy it to production. The green ones are the stories that get us to the point that it's actually viable as a system of record. And then the light blue is a story that's another existing feature. So something that exists today, but we could go live without. And then the purple stories are new features, enhancements that the current state doesn't have today that may be the driving force behind why we're wanting to rewrite the system in the first place. So if we sequence our work like this, and this is a very common thing where we start out and say, first we're going to build this new feature because that's the feature that everyone's really excited about. This is the reason that we have the budget to even work on this at all. And we do a couple of those stories first, and then we do something that's necessary to deploy to production, and then we do another one, the new features everybody's excited about, and go through this process. So this would be one way of ordering it. On the other hand, we could take this other approach where we start out by saying, let's get the things that are capable of demonstration done first, and then get feedback from that, and then the ability to deploy to production, the things that have to be done to deploy to production, and sequence our work in this way. We now are doing something a little bit different. And you've probably seen the example of using a skateboard and then turning it into a scooter and then kind of evolving it to a bicycle, motorcycle, and car. In this case, we have the choice of where we want to, where we're building this in a way that allows the system to be exercised by the user. So in this first example, the only place we can possibly go live is over here because that's the first time we have done all the stories that are necessary to be in the state that is deployable to production. Down here, we've done something for this capable of demonstration, just get user feedback, and then we've done some stories that are the bare minimum necessary to go to production, so features, security, etc., to deploy production, even if it's not fully ready to use. So they get a little bit more experience with it. They may not be okay with it being the system of record yet. Then we do some things that make it viable as a system of record. And so at that point, we've got the equivalent of a bicycle that the user could get by with to use maybe in certain simple circumstances. But now we have many options of when we could go live. Once we get to the point that the user has the equivalent of a bicycle, they could choose and say, yes, let's go live with this. Or they could say, let's go and keep using the old system until we get a little bit further some of these things that are existing features that I know we could do without, but we're willing to wait because we want those to be in place before we start using this as a system of record. And then we get to the point that we do those new things that are really exciting and probably justifying the budget. But we've now built a lot of flexibility in it just in the way that we've ordered these user stories. So looking at it from another way, notice here the difference between doing these stories in this order up here and doing the stories in the order down here. We've got many more options here of when we can go live. In the top, we've got many fewer options of when we can go live. And we may be able to do even better. If we're able to take our stories and split them down into smaller pieces, we may be able to then reorder it and end up with something like this and build in the flexibility to go live even sooner. And if we're able to split the stories, we may find that some pieces of these can be removed entirely. And to remove those and stick them at the end, we've now further reduced our go live risk, moved it forward in time, so we now have the ability to go live sooner. So these are all things that if we're using stories and splitting them down, like the example of we want a highway to Kansas City, and then we split it down to a highway to Pleasanton, and then we split it down to just a trail to Pleasanton. These are all ways to give us the capability of doing these types of, the capability of building in this flexibility and reducing our risk. If something ends up taking longer and we're in a situation where we have the ability to go live sooner, that insulates us from the potential downsides of needing to go live and missing a date and all those things around that. So let's look at an example of Sam's Shoes. So Sam's Shoes is a prestigious old shoe store that's been selling shoes for many, many years. And Sam wants to go online because they haven't been online yet. So he's not selling shoes online. He sees that as the future. So as Sam, I want to sell shoes online so I can make money. Well, that might be good, but if working software is the primary measure of progress, we could end up with a story like this. As a user, I want the system to work, so I will be happy. This isn't very useful to us because it's so broad. It's not something. So how can we refine this? Well, the thing here is, as Sam, I want to say, and this particular story, I've had people try to write stories like this before. It's like this makes it appear that it's a magic wand, and that's not how we want to approach stories. This doesn't help us evolve the story toward the user's need. So as Sam, I want to sell shoes online so I can make money. Well, to actually do this, we might need all these things. We need a shopping cart, credit card processing, loyalty programs, customer login, saved addresses, inventory, recommendation. I mean, there's all this stuff that could fall underneath this. Now, on the other hand, another thing we don't want to do is have a story like this. So as a developer, I want an API to the database so web services can query. Well, this doesn't actually represent anything that the customer actually gets. It's also be hard to know if you're done in this particular thing, because it's hard to know when this is done, because we can create every API we think we're going to need. What if there's some APIs that turns out we need that we don't think of? What if we build a bunch of APIs that turns out we later don't need? So a story like this, as a customer, I want to see inventory so I can call to order. So this is a very refined, very simplified story, and maybe we end up with a website that looks like this. So call to order, there's our shoes, there's our prices for the shoes, we've got super shoes, duper shoes, and super duper shoes, and a telephone number. Now, the return on investment for this story, which should be very, very simple, is we may be able to get some orders, people calling on the phone. We may be able to get some metrics. Will anyone, Sam's Shoes customers are very prestigious customers. Will they even go to the website to look for shoes? They may not. That's an assumption we're making. And starting out with that just very simple page that lists everything might be a good way to prove out those assumptions. And this isn't entirely hypothetical, the idea of the shoe example. In Zappos, when they first started, the way that they proved out their system is they would go down to Foot Locker, buy a bunch of shoes, bring them back to their offices, take pictures of their shoes, put them up on their website, return the shoes to Foot Locker, and then if somebody bought a pair of shoes, they'd go back to Foot Locker, buy the shoes, package it up in their packaging, and send it out to people. That wasn't the end goal of what they wanted their delivery and fulfillment process to be, but it did allow them to be in a situation where they were proving out that people actually, I mean, what if people had a horrible aversion to actually putting something on their foot that came through the mail or that they ordered over the internet? They would have found out before they invested in everything else they did to build out their order entry. So next story. So what would be the next simplest step for Sam's Shoes? Maybe we have this. As a customer, I want to order online so I don't have to call. Okay, that might be a step. Maybe we don't actually need a shopping cart to take this next step. And we've taken the thing we started with. We've got an order button. When you click on order, it asks you for your size, your name, address, and credit card, and places the order. We haven't built any type of login facility. There's no loyalty mechanism. It's just very, very, very simple. But now we can take orders online. Then maybe we have, as a customer, I want to add items to a cart so I can order multiple items. Now, we may find that when people buy shoes, they just buy one pair at a time. And so maybe this isn't important. Maybe this isn't what the people using our website are asking for. Maybe they're asking for something else. Maybe we discover that Sam's Shoe clients are so prestigious they never use credit cards and they buy everything on credit. Well, then having credit cards order processing doesn't matter. Maybe there's a different mechanism that we need, but we're proving those things out as we go. So maybe we click here to add it to a cart. Now you can probably see why I'm not, usually hired on teams. I come in helping coach teams, but not necessarily coming as their graphic designer with my great graphics here for adding to a cart. Well, now we've got a case here where you can add it to the cart, you move it to the cart. You can then place the order. We still don't have a login. As a customer, maybe I want to save my address so I don't have to re-enter it. As a customer, I want to save my credit card information so I don't have to re-enter it. So these are all incremental approaches that we can prove out as we go and make sure that we're building what the customer actually needs. So the question for you, back to kind of our question of ship with Theseus, at what point do you have a new software application? Is it once the last line of original code base has been replaced through a process of weekly changes? Is it when a new application is created and the old data is migrated over? Both A, be a new application? What do you think? And there's not a right answer here, but what I want us to do is be thinking about the fact that our application should grow and evolve. And too often, I think we're in situations where we are so worried that we're going to have to touch a line of code again that we're not willing to evolve it and change it. Sometimes that's because we don't have proper testing in place, and so we're scared we'll break something. But like I said, there's not a right answer here. My point is that we need to be very willing to let the application evolve into other things. Okay, so we're going to do, we will, I think probably most of you are not in the US here, but we will do let me just mention a few things. So if you like that cartoon, you go to youtube.com/markshed, SHEAD. I've got a bunch of other Agile cartoons there. I've also got a book, Starting Agile. If you would, excuse me, if you would like a copy, I would love to get that to you. Or I would love to, there's ways you can get online. Just send me an email. I'll make sure we get you a copy of the PDF. Also, my Agile Lunch and Learns that I do on noon Central Time, US time, every Tuesday can be found archived at this address, and this talk will be up there as well. Let's see, did I have a, oh, okay. So that actually covers what I was wanting to cover there. I thought I had a giveaway thing at the end, but I guess that's not in this particular presentation. Let me see if I did have that. Okay, good. Okay, so that covers what I wanted to look at with user stories. I hope that's useful, but I'd also like to hear of any questions, experiences you've had with user stories, anything you want to chat about. What have your experiences been with user stories? Have they gone kind of like what we're describing here? Or has it been something different? And feel free to, you can type in the chat or just come off mute. There's a small group here, so we can definitely talk. Does this seem like a useful way to approach user stories? Is it what you're already doing? Go ahead. I think it's Nevu. I may be pronouncing it wrong. Sorry.
Yeah, it's correct. It's Nyevu. I'm calling in from Nairobi, Kenya, and I've been using user stories for the longest time. And I think I joined a new company in September, and they weren't using user stories, so I introduced it to them, and they really appreciated it. The process owner now understands, and then the development vendors understand what is needed. And at the end, we use less time coming up with the FDDs because of the user stories are clear and precise as what each person or each workflow is needed. So it's been really helpful. So I've been
Awesome.
using them quite a while. Yeah.
Awesome. Are you finding they're giving you small increments that you can evolve the application, or are they bigger units?
Small increments that I can finally have a final developed product in the end. So
Okay.
that's good.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
welcome from Kenya. That's I'm imagining my normal time of doing these talks aren't very convenient if you're in Kenya. So I'm glad you're able to join today.
Actually, it's 12 noon, so it's perfect timing.
Okay, cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else? Any questions about user stories? And I'm very open to people disagreeing, and we can talk through if this doesn't seem like this works very well to me. I'd love to hear what your experience has been.
Hi, Mark. I'm Shah calling from the UK. Thank you for your presentation. My query was around when you're building software and the end user is a tech administrator. I don't know, I just find it harder. And like when you showed some of the bad user stories, I was like, I do that a little bit, but I write the end user customer one as well. And I'm thinking, how do I get around that? The end user is the tech guys.
So are these API stories?
So for example, one of the projects we're working on is building a new Active Directory. So yeah, the administrators are the end users, but yeah, we still have, all of our colleagues that will log in and need the connectivity.
Okay. So, and it does get a little bit more tricky. Well, let's talk about why does it get tricky with when the end users are tech people. I think one reason it's more complicated is because it's easier for us to see them as tech people that have desires and wants that have to do with the way things are architected more than the actual way they're going to experience it. And so what I'd
Yeah.
encourage you to do is kind of step back and say, okay, they may know they may know how the sausage is made, to use an expression. They may know that part of it, but what are they actually trying to do? If they need to be able to create a user in the system or edit a user in the system, you're now representing what they're going to do with their user of the system hat on, and stay away from it. It's really easy to include all the technical details of how you're going to build it instead of just being, well, here's what they need to actually do with the system within Active Directory. And I think if you steer toward that, it may help, but I recognize it does get more challenging when you're working with technical users. Does that help?
Thank you. That's still helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, and but I do. You will probably have many conversations if you're sitting down talking to the user about what they want. Many conversations where they're going to give you architectural information about how they want to see things made, rather than information about how they want to interact with the system. So if you can keep asking questions that drive toward, okay, but what do you want to do with this? And one important part of this is, if you get into all the architecture at the level you should be doing the user story, you want just enough information that they can see the return on investment they're going to get from it, and then prioritize it against other stories. If your story gets bogged down in the details about how it's going to be architected, that keeps you from being at that high level of just prioritizing stories, and you end up doing a bunch of work that will be useless if the story before the story actually starts being worked on. So that sometimes can be a way to kind of steer toward, let's focus on what this gives you, the value this gives you, not how it's going to be built. And maybe some of that would be helpful, but definitely recognize that that can be a challenge. It's not always easy working with technical users.
Thank
Any
you.
other thoughts or questions? You have some guidance on how, okay, user stories. That's the United States, but I think you mean user stories. That makes more sense now. For data platforms. So I think what you're talking about is you're being charged with creating, well, for example, creating the database that will be used as an application somewhere else. Is that what you're thinking, Wes? You said, as a engineer, I still have difficulties defining user stories in data field and following acceptance test driven development in TDD practices. Guidance on how user stories should be defined for data platforms building. So if you feel free to just speak up if your mic's are. Go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
Yes. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. So this is Wes from France. So my request is regarding, for example, in data platform, we are defining or creating the data products like reporting in a PDF or Excel or something like dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
So here the question, how could we define the process of the user stories, so in order to come to this goal, to create the dashboard or to create the PDF report, for example. So I still have some difficulties to define this process while using the ATDD or TDD practices and so on.
So if I understand your question correctly, I think what you're saying is you're building data artifacts, PDFs, different things like that the user is going to use in some way to make decisions for something they need to know about the data that you're hosting. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the thing that I think can help in those that I've seen help in those situations is make sure that you're not so focused on the mechanics of how the report is made that you lose the return on investment and the value it provides for the user. So I think if your user stories can steer more to who is the user and what are they going to do with it, and why do they want this PDF? So as a XYZ analyst, I want a report showing ABCD so I can decide how to invest in the market or whatever it is for them. If you can gear your user stories toward that, I think it helps you make sure that you're taking the user standpoint rather than being a story that's saying, as a as a system, I want to have a PDF that shows me this information. Does that make sense? And I'm not, if that's not headed in the right direction, help me clarify.
Yes, yes.
Now, as far as TDD, it can be challenging. What I've seen with test-driven development, if you're downloading a PDF, can be challenging in trying to look at the PDF. What I've seen in some cases is where we test the engine that takes the data, maybe what's showing on the screen, and produces the PDF, and we have lots of tests to make sure that works. And then our TDD for actually creating the reports tests from whatever they were searching for to make sure that shows up on the screen. So sometimes you can break those things up if testing by looking in a PDF is a little bit challenging just because of the mechanics of the test. And I don't know if that helps with what you're talking about or not, but that's something to consider.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Good question. Thanks. Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Feel free. You should have my email. If you reply to an invitation you got, you should. Maverick, let me type my email here just in case it got forwarded to someone. So there's my email. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You will probably continue getting invites. I will probably try doing some more. I've got another one coming up that's going to be 3 hours later from now that might be convenient for some of you. That's coming up in a few weeks. But if we have good turnout like this, we may try to do more of these in time zone that works better for you. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And my role usually in helping organizations is to come in and embed with the team and actually help code side by side with the developers while we make sure that the developers are getting the best value out of stories and that we're writing stories in a good way and that just making everything work more efficiently together. I've done a lot of work with the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank System, the Central Bank of the United States. So if that sounds like something that you might be beneficial for your team, done a lot of stuff on remote, please reach out and talk about it. Not a fit, it may not be a fit for everyone, but if it is a good fit, we can do some really incredible things together. So feel free to reach out. If that's of any interest. Feel free to reach out. If you've got any other questions about anything, if you'd like a copy of my book, reach out. I'll send you a PDF of that. But thank you everybody for coming and I hope you have a great rest of your day.